Thank you, Chair Murray. Senator Britt.
Chair Murphy, before I start, just a point of personal privilege. Need to give you a public congratulations. Our two teams faced off in the Final Four. I am incredibly proud of the Crimson Tide and all the players and the positive impact they made both on the tournament and have for the state. Everybody from Grant Nelson, who John Hoven always tells me is from North Dakota. He doesn't let me forget that. Nick Pringle, Mark Sears' mom, who may be our true MVP. But Nate Oates did an incredible job. But at the end of the day, obviously, y'all came out victorious, not only in the Final Four, but in the tournament for the second year in a row. Pretty incredible. So while I'll never miss an opportunity to say Roll Tide, I have to tip my hat, say congratulations and go Huskies.
Well, and Alabama, to their credit, gave us our closest game in 2 years. Excellent. We only beat you by 14 points.
There you go. Right. We'll take it. We'll be back. We'll be back next year. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for testifying today. I am pleased that we were able to avoid a year-long continuing resolution when it came to the FY24 Homeland Security Appropriations bill. The FY24 bill took incremental steps to start moving away from merely managing the border crisis created under this administration and actually included significant steps to strengthen our border security and immigration enforcement on our nation's interior and right there at the border. In particular, it was great to see the FY24 funding for over 2,000 new Border Patrol agents, as well as additional ports of entry officers and ICE officers. The final bill also importantly included a 22% increase in detention beds. A major increase in funding for removal operations was also something I was pleased to see. Disappointingly, President Biden's FY25 budget request for the Department of Homeland Security does not follow this model, and instead repeats the same mistakes of his previous budget request. Once again, this administration has proposed cutting the DHS base budget. The FY25 presidential budget request would cut base DHS funding by more than $1.25 billion, a reduction of 2% from the FY24 levels. At a time when our country undoubtedly faces a national security and a humanitarian crisis of historic proportions at our southern border, this is completely nonsensical. Considering that President Biden has proposed increasing the EPA budget by roughly 20%, it clearly shows where this administration's priorities are. It is clear that this administration's budget requests in recent years are designed to merely manage the border crisis it created and will not actually solve the problem. Nor will border policy legislation that doesn't take away President Biden's ability to continue to abuse tools and loopholes that fuel and facilitate the entry of inadmissible aliens into the United States, including the unprecedented abuse of the presidential parole authority. The truth is that we have a president who could take executive action, and if he wanted to, he would. If reports that we're seeing today are accurate, the president has finally, after over 1,100 days into his administration, admitted that he does have the authority. Unfortunately, rather than reversing course, this inadequate budget request for the Department of Homeland Security only doubles down on the failed policies of the last 3 years. Across the board, the administration is failing to put its money where it matters. This includes the ongoing fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl is responsible for more than 200 deaths every single day and is the #1 cause of death for Americans ages 18 through 45. I want to commend the brave men and women of CBP, ICE, and the U.S. Coast Guard who are on the front lines each and every day to interdict fentanyl and other deadly drugs. But the numbers are increasingly shocking. In FY23, ICE Homeland Security investigations seized nearly 42,000 pounds of fentanyl, while CBP seized an additional 27 pounds of fentanyl, almost all of it at the southern border. These numbers are roughly double the amount seized in the previous year. While President Biden's budget request includes many references to commitment to countering fentanyl, its actual funding request is sorely lacking. The request includes no new funding for non-intrusive inspection equipment, at ports of entry and only marginally new investments, increases marginally new investments for counter-fentanyl labs, technology, and staffing. The cartels continue to evolve their activities to stay ahead of our best efforts, and a budget that makes only minimal new investment to combat fentanyl will fail to make the progress we need in order to protect American families and communities from this poison. Mr. Secretary, for the fourth year in a row, this administration has submitted a Homeland Security budget that fails to provide sufficient resources to allow the men and women of the department to protect our nation and the many threats it faces. At a time when migrant encounters continue to set record after record, when the number of migrants released into the interior of the United States is overwhelming, the ability of local communities to absorb them, and when fentanyl and dangerous criminals continue to flood our nation and kill our citizens, it is unacceptable that this administration's response is to cut base funding for the Department of Homeland Security. I look forward to working with the department and my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to enact a budget for FY25 that builds on the steps taken in FY24 to strengthen our border security, increase immigration enforcement, and crack down on the cartels that are trafficking these substances into our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Britt.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. Mr. Secretary, one of the criticisms we've heard from you repeatedly when it comes to Title 42 expulsions is that expulsion doesn't result in the delivery of a real consequence in the way that deportations or removals do. And removal is, of course, the ultimate consequence for violating our immigration laws. That being the case, do you agree with me that the approximately 1.3 million illegal aliens in the United States who have received due process and have been given their final orders of removal by an immigration judge should be expeditiously removed from the United States?
Ranking Member Britt, I'm not familiar with the numeric figure that you cite, but an individual who's been provided due process, who has a final order of removal, should be removed from the United States. When we adjudicate the fact that they do not have a lawful basis to remain in the United States, they should be removed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I am so glad we agree on that. Over a 3-year period, the Biden administration has actually removed fewer people in total. So the first 3 years, so not the last 11 months, the first 3 years, removed fewer people in total than both Presidents Obama and Trump removed in each individual year of their administration. So I am hopeful that we can have the appropriate resources there, and we're able to remove the 1.3 million people who have been given due process. And on that note, if you had more ICE officers, more funding for officers there, would that be a helpful tool in being able to remove these individuals that have been given their due process?
2 points, if I may, Ranking Member
Yes.
Britt. In response to your discrete question, the answer is yes. More personnel would assist us, not just the officers and agents themselves, but of course the support personnel upon which they rely. But with respect to the data that you cite, I should note that we have removed on a monthly basis more aggravated felons resident in the United States unlawfully than in the prior administration on a monthly basis.
Okay, and obviously we're not talking about felons. We're talking about those people who have been given due process and are set to remove. We need to go ahead and remove them because that serves as a deterrent in talking about what we were discussing before. So as you probably are aware, with respect to due process, the Syracuse University found in 2021 approximately 200,000 immigration court cases were dismissed because DHS failed to file a notice to appear with the court. Are you aware that that number is 12 times higher than the number of cases dismissed for the same reason during all the years before FY24 up till FY2020 combined?
Ranking Member Britt, my understanding is that that number may or may not be accurate, so we are looking into that, number one. Number two, it is not necessarily that the notice to appear was not filed, but the notice to appear might have had a deficiency. That has been an issue for years in the Department of Homeland Security, and in fact, we have used technology to improve the accuracy and correctness of notices to appear.
Good.
And I think we have data with respect to the success of those notices to appear that is more
So
current.
does DHS intend to reissue the notice to appear in those cases?
Yes, most certainly.
Okay,
It is our
great.
responsibility.
Excellent. All right, there are more than 7 million migrants on that non-detained docket when we were talking about, so double the number at the start of this administration. When you look at that and you look at the record-shattering numbers of people who have entered this country illegally and released into our interior, do you believe that that represents an increased risk to public safety in this country?
I think it is a powerful reflection of an absolutely broken immigration system. And let me share with you data to evidence the fact that this has been years long in the making. In 2010, the average...
I only have a minute and 50 seconds left, so I'm going to have to continue moving on. But I do want to say that ICE has detained more than 32,000 migrants here with criminal convictions and another 11,000 with pending criminal charges. Some of these criminal records, those with criminal records have actually been released by ICE into the United States. And a couple of examples that I want to make sure we get out there. There have been 4,700 with convictions for assault, 450 of whom have been released. There have been 5,200 with convictions for drug crimes, 261 of which have been released. There have been 1,100 with convictions for weapons crimes, 92 of which have been released. There have been 1,200 with convictions for sexual assault, 46 of whom have been released. And there have been 490 with convictions for homicide, 50 of whom have been released. So I am hopeful that we can agree that when we have this type of chaos at our border, that it does increase the risk for our public safety here in the country. And so with my last 42 seconds, I do want to ask you a quick question. When it looks at the CHNV program and what we're seeing, we've got some data that says that DHS approved approximately 97.6% of applications that were received under the CHNV program. And so that approval rate to me is indicative of applicants not receiving that individualized case-by-case consideration that's required by the law. And your response to that, do you feel like there is just a blanket kind of a blanket gift of the CHNV program into the interior, or do you feel like those have been mindfully looked at individually?
Ranking Member Britt, those cases are reviewed on an individualized basis. In response to your earlier point, I look forward to providing you with the data which reflects an increased focus on individuals in the interior of the United States who do not have a lawful basis to stay and who have suffered a criminal conviction, because our success rate is far greater than in the prior administration.
Thank you.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. When we look at the number of individuals that are detained by ICE, roughly on average, there's been about 39,000 detained this year. My question goes to the FY24 Appropriations bill that was passed a few weeks ago and the funding level that was submitted there and passed for detention. Is that something that we need to continue, in your opinion, for FY25 to allow you to be able to detain the number of individuals you need to?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much. When you look at encounters, obviously coming across the border, we know there's been a lot of discussion about known gotaways and people that we've seen, but we don't know who they are, where they're going, or what their intentions are. The FBI director warned that he is increasingly concerned that terrorists may seek that opportunity to enter the U.S., and he's concerned about what that does in the interior of our homeland. And so I know that that's something that you probably pay close attention to as well. Is that something that you agree with? Just when we look at what's happening in the interior, it just increases threats across the homeland.
We are indeed very concerned about it. The safety and security of the American people is our highest priority. the bipartisan legislation would have provided us with additional staffing that would have strengthened the security of the southern border.
Yeah, and I am a big believer we've got to do our job right now, and so as I look at FY25, it is my goal to make sure that we get these dollars in the exact right place possible. I would love to see Congress start to do our job on time. I think that the American people deserve it, and I think every time we drag our feet, they're the ones that pay the price. You know, the last time that we actually passed all 12 bills on time was 1997. I think it's not only fiscally irresponsible, I think it's morally irresponsible. I think you need to know what your budget is, and I think when you look at something like a supplemental, you have to actually have base funding first. So my goal right now is to make sure that in FY25, we stretch every dollar, we put it where it matters, we put it where it can help you and help the courageous men and women that work in the Department of Homeland Security do their job. So I am laser focused on that. And in that, I really do appreciate the work that CBP and ICE have done in their seizures. I think they've grown when it comes to fentanyl and other illicit drugs. They continue to seize more and more, which obviously we know that means that's less that can get into our homeland. However, I know we can't simply seize our way out of it. And so would love to know from you, where would be best to direct dollars? You know, what are you doing to actually disrupt and dismantle that transnational criminal organizations and kind of the flow of that? And is there a place, maybe more HSI agents and others that would help disrupt that even more?
Ranking Member Britt, more personnel is certainly one element of the answer. More HSI agents, more support personnel for the agents, more Customs and Border Protection officers and agents, more funding for technology. I am listing the different things that the bipartisan legislation would have delivered.
Okay. When we look at the Coast Guard, I strongly support the Coast Guard, and I'm proud that Mobile is the home of the Coast Guard Aviation Training Center, and I'm very proud of the offshore patrol cutter being built in Alabama. However, that's just one of the pieces of a very large Coast Guard shipbuilding strategy. I'm concerned with many other Coast Guard acquisition programs, which seem to be plagued with various issues. I am especially concerned about the status of the Waterways Commerce Cutter Program and the Polar Security Cutter Program, which have been faced with significant delays in recent years. I know that you've heard a number of my colleagues speak about this on both sides of the aisle. And I'm just taking a look at it. You look at the Waterways Commerce Cutter, which was intended by Congress to be a small business shipbuilding program. It's faced legal challenges and other significant contracting challenges in recent months. And as the daughter of two small business owners, I think it is important to me that our entire defense base, particularly as it pertains to shipbuilding, that they're giving consideration and given every fair opportunity to compete. And I think that that's what we need when we look at things that have just come down and the naval intelligence that was just declassified, looking at the shipbuilding of China, saying they can shipbuild 232 times faster than we can. I think that as many people as we have, encouraging that, particularly from a small business perspective, I think that's better for America. So, Mr. Secretary, will you commit to engaging your Coast Guard leadership and looking into the current state of play when it comes to the Waterways Commerce Cutter Program and what options should be considered, even if it means recompeting the program, to ensure the Coast Guard receives the shipbuilding assets they need in a timely manner and cost-effective schedule?
Ranking Member Britt, I certainly will engage with the Coast Guard.
Thank you.
And look at this program and be in touch with you.
I really appreciate that. And one last thing, when we look at the alleged killer of Laken Riley, who entered the United States illegally in 2022 and then was released under DHS under a grant of parole, I'm sure your department has taken a look at that. And can you explain what specific either humanitarian reason or reason of significant public benefit, as you well know, one of those two things had to be used to authorize his release into the country. Can you explain that for this panel as well?
Ranking Member Britt, there was no derogatory information of which we were aware in our holdings. to compel the detention of this individual. It's a tragic circumstance. Our hearts break. I know all our hearts break for the family of Ms. Riley, and we expect that the individual will be prosecuted correctly to the fullest extent of the law.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that.